So this is 11:15 local time in London on Saturday, the 27th of March 2021, and 22:45 hours GMT. And we are continuing. This is part 2 or part B. And we are continuing with the theme, the general theme that is shown there, the racism at White Rock, previously known as Black Rock, as shown to Esma Bengabsia, the Arab, obviously Muslim woman, born in the USA and by birth an American citizen. And Shamima Begum, who has been robbed of her British citizenship by birth, and the robber was the son of a Pakistani bus driver, Sajid Javid, while in post as the UK's Interior Minister. And the robbery of the life and dignity and honor and freedom of Sarah Everard while she was walking home from a visit to a friend earlier at the beginning of this month. I think the date is 3rd of March 2021. And the reaction of the London Metropolitan Police to the peaceful vigil and protest against her abduction and possible rape and murder by, this is chilling, a so-called serving policeman in the Metropolitan Police. And the Bristol in London, in England, the Bristol protests against police, and today's disclosure by the staff member of the Daily Mirror that he was beaten up, despite the fact after he told the police in Bristol that he was a journalist. And the Tower Hamlets Council serial neglect of the safeguarding the children duties the Tower Hamlets Council owed to the 4 schoolgirls, including Shamima Begum, over a period of about 10 years. And we are concerned about the fact that it wasn't a one-off. Tower Hamlets Council in East London, one of the London boroughs, or one of the England local boroughs, where the people in the population, in the electorate, include significant numbers from Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. And we are also going to update on the Charlie Hebdo cartoon of the Prophet of Islam, peace be on him, which was shown to a class by a teacher in a school in Batley in West Yorkshire. And the speed with which the current UK cabinet member, at the expense of education, Gavin Williamson, who looks like the actor Michael Crawford, the lead player in the series, BBC series, 1970s series, Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. And the assorted other revelations about the corrupt the racist and the unaccountable judicial bureaucracy in the UK, and similar issues. And finally, the question of Tower Hamlets Council being currently lumbered with the corrupt post of elected mayor. It is possible to remove that post only if genuine campaign is done currently, asking the voters to vote no to the corrupt post at the 6th of May 2021, date when this mini kind of referendum question is going to be put. If the people don't vote no, when Tower Hamlets is condemned, then Tower Hamlets Council and the community, insofar as the community is affected by the behavior of the council, is doomed to get even worse than it is now, or it has been so far. So these are the items that we shall be covering in this particular edition. It is not possible to predict how long it will run for, this particular edition, but I'm going to do my best to cover all of these items and the ancillary related relevant issues. Internationally, in Bangladesh, there has been at least 2 days or 3 days of kind of confrontation between the protesters against the visit, I think, which has taken place now on Saturday, 27th of March 2021. Visit by the Brahminist Indian nationalist, anti-Muslim Narendra Modi. We don't say any of these things by casually referring to him without consideration. These are all facts, and the opponents of the visit by Modi included people who are not necessarily religious. Bangladesh is a Muslim majority country, obviously, and most of the protests have been organized by Islamic groups and parties and others. But the others have actually included a large number of, or significant number of people that are openly not religious, but are opposed to Narendra Modi being given that kind of honor by the Bangladesh government. And that is based on the record of Modi as a very inappropriate kind of guest. I mean, factually, Modi is the one that flew to Rangoon, which is renamed now as Yangon by the Burmese kind of regime, shortly after the international news kind of media began to publish the main report that the Burmese had carried out a genocide against the Muslim Rohingyas. And Modi flew to Rangoon and congratulated the leader of the genocidist regime, Aung San Suu Kyi. And Modi has, since 2017, the year of the genocide of the Rohingyas, has been regularly creating pretexts to attack the Rohingya refugees. in parts of India. The largest number of refugees from Rohingya are located in a place called Cox's Bazar in the Chittagong region in Bangladesh, which is geographically, physically the nearest to Rohingya on the borders. And the Rohingya state, a region in Burma, is called Rakhine state. But it has been an area populated by Muslims in Burma. They're Burmese Muslims for hundreds of years. And the fact that it has been so is evident in the references to the invasion by the Muslims in what is now the Rohingya area or Rakhine state to what is now Bangladesh, various parts of Bangladesh, hundreds of years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And there are various legends and various tales and children's rhymes about that. So the genocidist Burmese claim that the Rohingyas were Bangladeshis who had infiltrated Burma recently is a complete, absolute, intentional, anti-Muslim, illegal, criminal lie. There are regions of the subcontinent where political state and ethnicity do not kind of correspond with one another. I mean, people from not just the subcontinent, but into the kind of areas that include Iran and going to Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and to the northwest, Kurdistan, and into Turkey, and then to the north and Central Asia. All these countries with a stan, S-T-A-N at the end. These are people ethnically and racially very much kind of from the same or similar backgrounds. So the Asian continent has got large numbers of people who look like me, and the strict description, classification is not clear cut, but we are not Mongoloid, which is the Chinese, and we are not the Negroid, which is the African people. So there are three main groups. So we fall into the Caucasian in that kind of classification. So the people in Burma are, on the one side, the majority numerically are the Mongoloids, and the Rohingyas are mainly Caucasian. The pigmentation is different. Obviously, it varies, but the majority of the Rohingyas are Caucasian. And that is not evidence in any way that the Caucasian Rohingyas, because of their ethnicity, are therefore not Burmese. And you go to all the other countries in the Southeast Asian region, and the Mongoloids are the majority, but they're not exclusively so. And if you go to Indonesia and you go to Malaysia and other parts, you will find a mixture of people from the Caucasian and the Mongoloid kind of backgrounds, and there are mixed parentage and mixed ancestries. And in the Uyghur region, where the Han Chinese have been persecuting the Muslim Uyghurs, you have got predominantly the main ethnicity origin includes significant Turkish background people. And the Turkish background people and the Arabic kind of background people mixed, predominantly Caucasian. And when the Spanish kind of Arab presence in Spain occurred, the composition of the religion of the population obviously underwent change, and a very significant Muslim presence became evident in everything, architecture, of course, in human beings, and so on. So the Muslim population in Spain, although they have been slaughtered, massacred, and genocided by the Christians later, the Muslims of Spain cannot be described as not Spanish or as being Arab or as being Turkish. So the whole world has got people of different ethnic backgrounds, faith backgrounds, but they are not to be confused with people of the countries of their ancestors. So we come back to the first name, Esma Bengabsia. She was ridiculed for not wearing a kind of Christian gear during Christmas by her co-workers or so-called co-workers at White Rock in the USA. And she was targeted because she was of Arab origin and she was a Muslim. And of course, she was a woman. And she was, in all those titles and descriptions and categories, she was numerically in a very small minority. And the fact that White Rock has the audacity, the contemptible and contemptuous audacity this month to say that they are going to address the issue of diversity proves that they are more racist and more brazen and more corrupt and more criminal in their outlook than Thomas Babington Macaulay was in the 1830s, when he said that he was foisting the English education system for the subcontinent, aimed to turn the Indians, that is the people of the subcontinent, including those who look like me, looking like me on the outside and on the inside, becoming English in a brainwashed, completely coconut way. And the coconut way exemplified by the likes of Sajid Javid and Priti Patel. I mean, one of the current conservative, anti-Muslim, racist, sub-intelligent members of parliament who really looks very unpleasant, let's put it this way. And it goes with his unpleasant rhetoric and hateful kind of opinion and attitude and outlook. And this man has been, Edward Gardiner, to say his name. He has been given the space and the media to spew against the most vulnerable people, the refugees and the asylum seekers. So, Every single statement that Priti Patel makes or every single statement that Gavin Williams made. This is the Times of Friday, yesterday. But this is the front page that I'm holding up there to go with the commentary and the diagnosis. So every single statement that Priti Patel, the UK Interior Minister in the cabinet of the Boris Johnson cabal, is a hostile statement. And it's a racist statement that is only describable on the evidence as being part of the script of the National Front and the British movement of the 1970s and 1980s. And when Cameron took residence at number 10 Downing Street in May 2010, after the racist Gordon Brown kind of collapsed and came apart because the mixture of his racism and his capitulation to the racist agenda and his failure to represent a coherent internationalist narrative against racism and racist backwardness and hostility of environment. When Cameron took over, Cameron's first things were one visit to Tower Hamlets, East London, number 28 Commercial Street, London E1, where the Toynbee Hall is based. And there he mounted, at the beginning of 2011, only a few months after he took over, a very corrupt and criminal intended attack on the poorest people in this country, focusing attention and isolating the integrity of the people, disparagingly, insultingly referred to as the benefits claimants. And this was a very corrupt and illegal spiel that he made. And in that, he also prepared the actual ground for his later anti-Muslim rhetoric that he delivered not long after at an intentionally choreographed venue in Munich. Now, Munich is the place where Hitler made his notorious Nazi kind of claims. And Cameron, of all the spots and places in the world and in the UK, chose Munich, where he echoed a lot of Hitler's and Nazis' rhetoric against people that Cameron condemns as migrants or asylum seekers. In his book, migrants and asylum seekers are not social constructs, but the people who are migrants and asylum seekers are in that position because of their heredity, because of their origin, who their parents were or who their families were. So this particular diagnosis of Fleet Street in the mainstream media in the UK, and the main political kind of post holders. This is being broadcast at a time when all the neo-Nazi, and fascistic kind of agendas of the 1970s and 1980s in Britain, and of the 1930s, for example, Oswald Mosley, and it is black in his black shirt movement. They are now official government policy now. This is not a joke. Fascism that has been fought by people in Britain for correct reasons is now official government policy. And what has happened with the police bill, that is actually a fascist bill, because it proscribes, that is to say, makes unlawful or illegal the most basic civil liberty actions. And this is happening at a time when the narrative, the rhetoric, and the commentary completely silent against this. There is tokenistic, going through the motion, bogus concern being expressed by parts of Lee Street, but essentially the Daily Mail, which openly appeased Hitler's Nazi party in the 1930s, is having the best Nazi propaganda opportunity now. And all their columnists, both on the Daily Mail group and also on the Rupert Murdoch-owned Dirty Diggers group, Times, Sunday Times, the Scum and the Scum on Sunday, and the Times Radio, which Murdoch has launched recently. These are all openly advocating fascism. They're not doing this by copying exact words that Hitler and the Nazis or the Oswald Mosley kind of used. What they're doing, they're using different kind of phrases and phraseology to actually get across the same message. For example, there are two words that have become established by the racists and Nazis in Britain in the last 12 months. One is woke, and the other is cancel culture, the phrase. Both of them are against those who oppose racism and fascism. So woke is a word they use to describe anti-racists and anti-fascists without calling them anti-racists and anti-fascists. And that is a crafty way, a dishonest way to hide and conceal their true activities and conduct and agenda. And cancel culture is the same. Cancel culture, like George Bush, the first one, not the second Bush, but the first one, gave high circulation by this political correctness. That was the previous form of abuse of anti-racists and anti-fascists, calling them politically correct in a derogatory sense. It is, of course, politically correct for the best of reasons, because as the founding statements and declarations of the United Nations says, the very purpose of setting up the United Nations was to avoid the scourge of the war that they call Second World War, but I call Second European War, because the war was actually initiated by the Europeans, not consulting the rest of the world. But that is my reason, and I have been saying this amongst other things. I mean, this is the vocabulary, that is my vocabulary, my diagnostic philosophical vocabulary, which includes the name Edward Said. It's not Edward Said, the individual Palestinian academic who was given an academic spot in the USA, but it is the impact and the implication of Edward Said Let me explain in short paragraph. Edward Said was, of course, a Palestinian, but he was not a Palestinian. He was not a representative of ordinary Palestinians, not because he was bourgeois or he was middle class, and the majority of the Palestinians were not bourgeois or middle class. Edward Said was a Christian, and in the totality of the Palestinian population, Christians are not a significant component. Regardless of that, whether they're significant or not, the reason why Edward Said was given the job by the Americans, who lost no opportunity but to mention that he's a Palestinian, is dubious and corrupt and absolutely linked with the anti-Muslim agenda, the crusade agenda. That was to show that the otherwise anti-Palestinian kind of Western institutions were really comfortable and had an academic, Palestinian academic. It is the diversity deception. But they were using Edward Said, not him. Remember, I'm making a distinction, because one of his works is the Orientalists. So he did make some original contributions and did some original thinking, etc. But the reason why the racists in the USA and the UK and across Western Europe and the remote kind of colonies like in Australia and South Africa and New Zealand, the reason why they over mentioned Edward Said was to show that they were not against the Palestinians, which was an absolute lie. They were against the Palestinians, and they still are. But they used Edward Said to promote their corrupt, racist, anti-Muslim agenda and narrative. So, Esma Bengabsia is not encountering racism or anti-Muslim hatred in America for the first time. She is not the first Muslim, let's say. In Canada, over the border, an Arab Muslim woman was the subject of a lot of discrimination, which I have covered and which I drew attention to in this country. And this is not a one-off thing. The Canadian Muslim woman was not probably born in Canada, but many Muslims born in Canada and those who come to Canada from Muslim countries or backgrounds are treated in the same discriminatory, hostile way. And no matter how trendy the Trudeau child is in his various pretensions, he is a racist, he is an anti-Muslim, as any of the others in Canada, in the Canadian judiciary, the Canadian parliament, Canadian media, and the Canadian governments. And it's not just one part of Canada, it's right across the country. And despite the fact that Justin Trudeau kind of politically made an opportunistic stance to come across as better than Trump by making bogus kind of gestures showing that he was tolerant of Muslims. The hostility against Muslims in Canada remains unabated. And the Canadian media, the Canadian television executives, Canadian television presenters, journalists, so-called, they're all of them are racistly hostile, and they are patronizing of the Muslims. So, for example, the type of person they welcome, just like the Edward Said kind of, let's say, syndrome. The Edward Said syndrome is repeated over time. I mean, it's not just Edward Said himself that they have been abusing or exploiting. So in the last 18 months, let's say, or 2 years, I mean, definitely before the pandemic, there was a woman from an Arab country who was rescued from a country in either Thailand or one of the Southeast Asian countries, where she was able to use the internet and Twitter, Facebook, whatever, to highlight her plight. And she was eventually rescued by the Canadians who gave her a home. But the way the anti-Muslim Canadian women paraded her and exploited her was absolutely stunning. I'm not going to give the details of that because it can be all found if you look up. I'm just giving a reference. So, and even Biden has behaved like Trump, in the case of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian journalist who was murdered on the order of the Saudi member concerned, so-called Crown Prince. Biden said he is not going to do anything. He has published the American internal security reports confirming who ordered the murder, which act, that is the publication of the name, etc., or the reports, were withheld or suppressed by Trump. That's the only difference. Trump suppressed the report, but Biden lifted the suppression, published the report, but then did the same thing as Trump. He didn't want to take any action against the Saudi royal families or Saudi governments or the states' murder. Same thing with the so-called ruler of Dubai, who has been reportedly having at least 2 of his daughters kidnapped and kept captive. And one of his daughters, Princess Latifa, according to reports she posted on the internet a few months ago, the Indians, Narendra Modi, actually allowed the Indian Navy to arrest her on behalf of the oppressive Dubai head of the country. So Modi, who aided the Burmese genocide narrative and commentary, wrongly saying that the genocide followed, that is, it was a response to Islamist extremists that were operating in the Rohingya region. The same anti-Islamist Modi used the Indian Navy to harass and terrorize and imprison and hand over to her oppressor a woman that was oppressed by a Muslim head of country or head of state. So all of these things are facts, and all these connections I'm making are facts. And the final kind of point about this part is that there exists no state-based or international forum of Muslims offering real material help to victims of oppression in Muslim countries and by Muslim regimes as well as other regimes. So it is not true just about the international level. Domestically, in Muslim majority countries, there is no real forum for offering and helping support to victims of oppression of all kinds in Muslim countries. And so that can be easily extrapolated to cover the whole world. Muslims, so against all of that background, and I'm making that background intentionally in order to highlight the corruption in all of this. When I say that the Muslims protesting against the Batley School teacher over the cartoon, when I say that they're doing it as a unrepresentative action, I mean all the other things that are going without any action by the Muslims. So this criticism that I'm making is not a criticism of the right of these persons to protest. No way. I'm making the criticism because, as I said yesterday and before, these same people in Batley or similar people in Batley and Birmingham, say Bradford as well, who are seen and visible as protesting against Christian or white people doing wrong things or anti-Muslim things, are very silent when Muslims do the wrong things. As I said about the whole gang of rapists across the northern English regions, where gangs or gangsters born in Britain to parents of Pakistani descent and origin, targeting mainly white girls whom they abused, sexually abused in the most horrific ways and for too long, too many years. How is it that no Muslim leaders or groups came out in the street with demands for action against these people and the demand for stopping the whatever was giving rise to and allowing these gang and gangsters to do these horrible things to the white girls? I mean, this is absolutely outrageously corrupt and criminal and must never be condoned, and yet it has been condoned. It is still being condoned. So my range of criticism actually includes everyone. It may not be a very entertaining presentation of a picture of the world, but that is the truth. Muslims have absolute every right to protest against intentionally targeted attacks on Muslims for being Muslims, or targeted attacks on Muslims by disregarding the Muslims' faith, as has happened in this case. The Batley Grammar School teacher who used the Charlie Hebdo cartoon was operating on a brainwashing kind of program that Muslims' sensitivities, particular sensitivities on issues like the Prophet, who has no image, that they didn't exist. And that these children, the significant numbers of whom were Muslim, could be targeted and treated as the targets of brainwashing under the guise of teaching whatever course this attack was a part of. As I said yesterday, the intervention of the so-called Muslim PRS, Saida Warsi, is very significant because Saida Warsi was put in post as a kind of junior minister by Dave, call me Dave Scam Aron, the racist criminal, David Cameron. Criminal because he's racist and a criminal because of the lobbying reports that have come out this week, that he intervened and lobbied for illicit payment of public funds to a gang of criminals posing as business persons. And his share in return for his lobbying, which couldn't have lasted more than a week in total, got him 70 million pounds, according to the reports in Fleet Street this week. So these are people who have proven corruption and criminality in their career. But these same criminals are given a moral height by the contradiction and the dishonesty on the part of the Muslims who stage selective protests and don't actually protest in accordance with the real teachings of the Prophet, in whose honor they are doing the protest in Batley, for example. Now, this is a serious, very serious failing among the Muslim peoples across the world. And it seems to me that I'm the one that I know, I'm the only one who exists, as far as I know, who is disturbed by this. And I have not known any Muslim who has actually even noticed this. How outrageous, how astonishing. And I include so many Muslims, so-called, who have done their PhDs and other so-called higher studies, postdoctoral research and everything. I shall diagnose a crook who did the PhD at Cambridge, and he was helped by me and my family. And this criminal turned out to be an absolute criminal who has been one of the causers of the multi-billion pound damages that I've been talking about. I mean, no matter how much the four notorious American multi-billionaires own in terms of cash and resource equivalents, I mean, the South African-born Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and the owners of Facebook, let's say. No matter what the actual combined resource equivalents would be if all their known personal so-called wealth were to be put together. It may exceed $1 trillion or so, but that would not even match, let alone exceed, in cost terms alone, the work that I have been doing and the impact and the implication and the effects for the good on the whole of humanity. Remember what I'm saying, because this is not the first time I'm saying it, but this is very important. And this relates to the corruption and the criminality and the dishonesty in the community in Tower Hamlets that has got contributors and criminals of all backgrounds. But the criminals of the Bangladeshi Siloti Muslim background are the main kind of criminals, perpetrators in a series of crimes against knowledge, crimes against humanity in terms of delaying and disrupting the overdue programs right across Africa and Asia and in Europe of very serious actions to, first of all, stop the dependence on the West by the people who are in extreme poverty in Africa and Asia. So you can add up the amount of benefit that they would have received if my program were not disrupted and delayed by these criminals that I've been talking about earlier. There are anything in Asia and Africa. Asia, of course, is the home of the largest numbers of people on the planet. But the poverty suffered by the people on the planet also exists, of course, across Africa. The number is different. The number is smaller than the number in Asia. And there are various levels and various facets of poverty. I mean, poverty is material poverty, food poverty, shortage of housing, etc. But there is this intellectual poverty, the poverty of thinking, poverty of thought and thinking, and the freedom to think about the whole community and whole humanity other than just for yourself. That is the impediment that has been fostered and perpetuated for a very long time, too long. People talk about poverty just in terms of food and shelter. But the serious, real poverty is the removal of the potential to think independently and think generously and think about the whole world, not about yourself. Now, you cannot do that if you are restrained and constrained and limited and deprived and kept in starvation yourself. There has to be a significant level of kind of freedom from shortage of food, shortage of shelter, etc. And freedom from a disruption, harassment. For people or individuals to make use of their potential to think. The intellectual aspect of human life is completely absent from all discussions about poverty. Think about that. I mean, lack of poverty or freedom from poverty is not just about food, eating food, and having a shelter. It's much more than that, much more than that. So that is one level. The other level is, as I keep coming to the issue that I associate with the likes of David Neuberger. Now, Neuberger is a German Jewish kind of person, origin, or Polish or Eastern European. And David Neuberger is a relative of the Jewish kind of public figure called Julia Neuberger. But these people have been given platforms because they're white. If they were not white, they would not be given platforms of the type that they have been given. As I have said, I never craved any platform because I do the campaign regardless of those things, and I operate, and I've always operated at a level intellectually, not conditional on those platforms. But most of the people in my knowledge, with the background, that general backgrounds that I am from, in terms of the country, the ethnicity, and other things, would not be given the platforms that Neubergers have been given. But when they are given those platforms, they don't actually use the platforms, and they have never used the platforms, evidentially I'm saying, to recognize or equally recognize people from Africa and Asia. So it's similar to what Edward Said did, but Edward Said at least occasionally referred to Palestinians. And what is happening in the current fascist surge, operated by Fleet Street, operated by the BBC, operated even by the Guardian and the academics and the political parties, of course, the main one being the Conservative Party, but not exclusively the Conservative. The Labour Party, so-called, is an active aider and abetter, as are the so-called left groups in the country. As I said earlier, the Socialist Workers' Party, on its records, has been a contributor to the secret service and a saboteur against the self-determining activities and campaigns organized by people of African and Asian backgrounds. And so this program, this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, is doing a number of things at the same time. We are doing the diagnosis of the mainstream media, the Fleet Street papers, and the BBC, incidentally, contextually. But we are also diagnosing the mainstream politics and everything else, the government, and the impact and the implications, and including, of course, all the pillars of the state, or all the estates of the state of the UK. So we go back to the Charlie Hebdo cartoon used from a few years back by the Batley grammar school teacher. And we then come back to the last 10 days or 2 weeks, which is 3-4 years since the Charlie Hebdo cartoon was originally published. And we see the Fleet Street hostility to Charlie Hebdo. Why? Was it because they realized 5 years later that the Muslims were correct to condemn Charlie Hebdo? No. The Charlie Hebdo name remained, and its particular approach to cartooning remained unchanged in terms of the style and the reliance on topical news for getting into the headlines by doing something topically, the talking point, or topically being discussed by the ordinary media. Charlie Hebdo is not an ordinary media, it's a periodical. But the difference is that unlike the daily print media in France, Charlie Hebdo, the print media, publishes very occasionally, but not kind of consistently occasionally. It manages sometimes to hit the jackpot of attention, which is the test whether it has been successful or not. And it got the cartoon about Brenda, that is Queen Elizabeth II, sitting on the neck of a cartoon figure of Meghan Markle. Well, Meghan Markle is saying she can't breathe, which is absolutely almost perfect timing and perfect kind of parallels and illustration. Because the man who died in Minneapolis, who was killed by a policeman, white policeman, sitting on his neck, while he, the victim, George Floyd, complained that he couldn't breathe. That has been only slightly changed and most effectively applied against Brenda and the royal family's racism. And all effective, powerful cartoons, as I said, they hit the jackpot very much accidentally. It doesn't always work, but this one worked. So when a cartoon works, whether it is expected to work or not by the cartoonist or the publisher is a different matter. But when it does work, it actually serves to enlighten the area or draw attention to the area, highlight the area. And in this case, the area was racism in the royal family. Absolutely perfect timing, because just before the Charlie Hebdo cartoon against Brenda was published, Diana's eldest son, Williams, was heavily promoted as saying that the royal family was definitely not racist. And Charlie Hebdo completely sank that particular denial. And what will go down in history in this context of the Oprah Winfrey interview and the series of allegations that Meghan Markle has made is that the royal family is truly depicted as a racist, sadistic, cruel, unfeeling, racist family. And Brenda's, as I said before, Latin phrase, annus horribilis, now has been replaced by this Charlie Hebdo cartoon. And because the Fleet Street and the British kind of stooges, the British media is essentially a stooge media that actually aids and abets and magnifies the achievements of the royal family. So it has been in complete kind of denial about Charlie Hebdo cartoon. That's why it is not being talked about, this cartoon. But internationally, Charlie Hebdo and the depiction of Brenda as a racist sitting on a black person and suffocating them will not be forgotten, let's say. And what that shows is that while the domestic Fleet Street and Parliament and the judiciary are all colluding with the racists, one racist colluding with another racist arm of the state or agency, internationally, various interventions like Charlie Hebdo's intervention from France, just across the small waters here, or the major intervention via the Oprah Winfrey interview. These have now overshadowed the crass and stupid self-confidence and state of denial by Brenda's family. And these have exposed Brenda as a racist monarch. I wrote in January 1991, a piece on the front page of the weekly Adhikar, that is Rights, based on the statement by a then Labour Party member of Parliament who asked the Queen, remember that was 91, beginning of 91. So it's, 1981. Yes, 1980, December 19th, 1980, was the date of the first edition of the weekly Adhikar being published. So 2 weeks, the third week, I think, of the Adhikar was published in January 1981, not 91. So just 40 years ago. And I used the picture of Brenda on the back of a horse. And I said, it was a Labour MP who had actually made the statement, which I paraphrased and turned into a report contextually. And it was, the headline in Bangladeshi was Rani Elizabeth Kotha Bolun. That is, Queen Elizabeth, speak up. Contextual English translation. And that was the Labour Party MP in the House of Commons at the time who called on the Queen to speak out against racism. It wasn't something I made up. It was a news item, strictly conventional, and was based on the statement by that particular Labour Party MP. Now that showed the persistence and the persistent kind of ID as a racist monarch. Now that was 40 years ago. 40 years before Charlie Hebdo cartoon showing monarch Brenda as a racist, suffocating a black woman by sitting on her. Now, in the 40 years, I have not seen any direct message or statement or suggestion by Brenda condemning racism. Okay? If anyone watching this thinks that I am not recounting correctly, then they can DM, send a direct message by the Twitter account of Khoodeelaar with the facts. No discussion, just the fact as to where Brenda might have addressed racism or opposed racism. But my view is that she hasn't. And my assertion is that she never said anything against racism in response to the journalism that I did in January 1981. Now, compared to the racists, the obvious racists, Fleet Street and their counterparts in the broadcasting media, and the counterparts in print, even in France and in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Los Angeles, just to mention some of the key kind of capitals or locations or metropolitan addresses where the main print media are based at. When I say that even if I don't speak, say, any number of European languages or read any number of European languages, I can say contextually that I don't have to know those languages in order to understand the narrative and the agenda of the print or the media published in those languages. Because the evidence of the last several decades of my daily study, examination, and diagnosis of the sort of press media convinced me that despite the fact that they are kind of rivals in many respects, one state is rival to another. Say, for example, the Greeks and the Italians are rivals in many ways. So the French and the Spanish are rivals. And so on, the smaller states across Western Europe are rivals to one another. Even Moscow, despite the fact that Vladimir Putin is not a socialist, effectively he's a capitalist of ordinary standard description. I mean, the contents of the narrative and the rhetoric used by the Moscow-based press and in effect repeated and relayed by the Moscow-based broadcasting counterparts. When it comes to Muslims and when it comes to racism, the Moscow-based political agenda about Asia, about Africa, is absolutely similar to what I see in London, in Fleet Street, or in Washington, or in Los Angeles, or in New York. Now, that is not to say that the Indian equivalents, the press, are Indian in their coverage against Muslims. For example, on Shamima Begum, this week, they have started to report on Shamima Begum's recent reported appearances as a Western dressed person. And there was a man called there was a sycophant for a very long time, for 40 years or so. A man who was the editor and publisher of a thing called the Blitz, Rk Karangia. Now, I'm not presenting this based on a script, I'm speaking from memory. So you can imagine that Karangia was a name that I was coming across quite often for a very long time. Rk Karangia was not a Hindu, not a Brahmin, but he converted to Hinduism late in his life. He was actually of a fire worshipping religious background, that is Parsi. He was a religious Parsi background. same as freak dondi. Now, Haque KhoodeelaarTV published what Fox News is known as currently in the USA, or even worse, more ferocious and corrupt propaganda sheet for the narrative of the Nehru family and Nehru dynasty. But although it was mainly to help the regime of Jawaharlal Nehru and his daughter later, the actual contents, the ingredients of the lies that Haque KhoodeelaarTV published in the Blitz gave the first persistent platform for what to become the BJP. Although it wasn't BJP as such or Hindu nationalist, but it was full of anti-Muslim hatred throughout, while the party political line that Haque KhoodeelaarTV ran was mainly in support of the Congress party at the center. So Haque KhoodeelaarTV is long dead, but his name, the Blitz, is still there. So this week the Blitz says caught up on Shamima Begum and has done a very anti-Muslim, corrupt, untruthful, fictitious attack on Shamima Begum. Not because they've got any evidence to substantiate anything about her, but the fact that she's a Muslim is enough for them to have a go at her, go to town against her. And I say that strictly as a contextual reference. And so therefore the other Indian kind of press, mainstream press and broadcasting outlet are going to be unsympathetic to any campaign for justice for children like Shamima Begum, because our campaign for these 4 girls, that we have been campaigning for the 4 girls, justice for the 4 girls, is from, let's say, the calendar year 2010 up to 26th of February this year, when the Supreme Court actually acted as the rubber stamp for the UK anti-Muslim Home Office and said that Shamima Begum was a threat to national security. Now there is no evidence. And this is the one, this line is being repeated by the Indian anti-Muslim fascist propaganda outlets, as typified in today's post, carried by the current form of the legacy of Haque KhoodeelaarTV, the Blitz. Now the stupidity of the Bangladesh kind of counterparts of the so-called press is evident in the fact that so many of the Bangladesh-based or Dhaka-based titles are named in imitation of Indian titles. So there is a kind of form of a blitz in Bangladesh. It's nothing like the original, but except in the dishonesty. And there are other titles in Dhaka that are complete plastic outlets. One of the main reasons why I don't actually discuss any of the Bangladesh-based titles is because I know them more than I know the Indian ones or the Pakistani ones, because I was, for a significant number of years, actively engaged in finding out the truth and publishing. And I found that I was the only one who was publishing those things. And I've been vindicated on every particular detail. No matter whether they're so-called Bangladesh nationalists or so-called Bengali nationalists or the so-called Islamic kind of political groups they are all dishonest, and they're shallow, and they're corrupt. Now, of course, all these three categories are found in India and Pakistan. As I said before, not today, but in a previous number of editions. This program will start looking at the press in India, and then the press in Pakistan, and the press in Bangladesh. I mean, when I say that looking at the press, it includes, of course, looking at the politicians and the political individuals and careerists in place and in posts at the time. And the fact that when he took over as Prime Minister, Imran Khan actually issued a couple of statements that went down very well internationally, because they were seen as refreshing departures from the corrupt years of Pakistan politics. That was at the beginning. And even our platforms, not this program, because the program didn't exist at the time that Imran Khan got in. But he posted on our Facebook and Twitter accounts commending factually as a reference those particular statements that Imran Khan made upon getting into the office of Prime Minister. But Imran Khan has not done anything to live up to any of those expectations. First of all, Imran Khan is silent. And secondly, either he is an instrument of something else, I don't know what, whatever it is, or he is stupid, except a few slogans. He doesn't have to listen to me. But I'm sure that other people have said things very similar to what I said a few times when I commented on him on this broadcast. And the one comment that I'll refer to here in this period, because this is 27th of March, so it's very near 25th of March, which has been marked in Bangladesh as the 50th anniversary. When Imran Khan allowed one Pakistani general recently to say publicly that the relationship by Pakistan with India should be kind of changed. What he meant was that the tense relationship should be changed by a cordial or calm relationship. That was a good move, good diplomatic move by any country about their neighbors. And as a student, an active student of international law and politics and history, I think that is how it should move. That doesn't mean that they should give up their precautions against the rivals. Say India or Pakistan are entitled to be very cautious about their neighbors. That is their right. In fact, that is their duty, to safeguard the country from any untoward happening resulting from ambitious actions by the neighbor. Ambition applies to Pakistan as well as India. Now, that is a fine diplomatic kind of statement. Now, why didn't Imran Khan follow that by marking the 50th anniversary along with Bangladesh and saying good things about Bangladesh. Number one. Number two question. Why didn't Imran Khan say sorry to the victims, the civilian victims I'm saying, and I said all along, the civilian victims of the Pakistan Army's assaults, rapes, gang rapes, murders. Why didn't Imran Khan say sorry this month, this week, to those civilian victims? And why didn't Imran Khan say that there was no mandate, de facto or de jure, for anyone acting in the name of the state of Pakistan during 1971 to carry out any crimes against humanity? And why didn't he say that the behavior of the Pakistan Army in 1971 was a crime against humanity and a crime against the founding principles of Pakistan itself, founding aims of Pakistan itself? And why didn't Imran Khan say that he would work with Bangladeshis interested in setting up an international inquiry, investigation into the behavior of the army against civilian people in Danish Pakistan, now Bangladesh? And why didn't Imran Khan say that he would start paying compensations to the victims or their survivors or descendants of those attacks? What law was Imran Khan following by staying silent on all of those? As I said originally when I advised him to say sorry for the atrocities, crimes, and massacres and rapes committed against civilian people by the Pakistan Army, I also said that if he did that, Imran Khan or anyone as the head of government in Pakistan said that or did that, then that would have the equivalent benefit for the whole of the subcontinent, measured in trillions of dollars. Because the people, the civilians in Pakistan, the civilians in Bangladesh, and the civilians in India have never asked for and most certainly do not need any conflagration, any confrontation, and most certainly any waste of hundreds of billions of dollars equivalent in the proliferation of war preparations. I mean, that is the only chapter 1 of my general observation and advice. What is happening in the subcontinent, as I have been saying, is these three major countries in terms of population and in terms of size, they have unforgivable numbers of people in poverty and hunger and starvation, all three of them. And migration is not an answer. And migration is caused in the main by instability, uncertainty, unsettlement, displacement, degeneration, caused in the country, in the region, in the state. And neither Bangladesh nor India nor Pakistan is addressing any of these. And with the exception of, my intervention in 1977 was probably the last Commonwealth-wide intervention, because the 1977 heads of government of the Commonwealth countries took place in London. And I confronted the then UK Prime Minister, the racist James Callaghan, as I did the then Indian Prime Minister, Morarji Desai. My conversations with the then President of Bangladesh, Ziaur Rahman, were wider than that, just one topic of racism in Britain. So I'm not including that in this list. I focused when I asked Morarji Desai the question about his government position in relation to the racist attacks on Commonwealth citizens, that is Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, that are going on in the UK at the time. My question was relatively short in length, but the magnitude of my question could be expressed in a very deep, long thesis of about 1,000 pages. Equally, Morarji Desai's tautological idiocy of a reply to my question could be also expressed in a volume of 1,000 pages, at least. Why is it that I'm the one who is asking these awkward questions and there is no known questioner from Pakistan or India or Bangladesh in the same kind of context? Why? Because if I can see these things, why can others not see the same things? So which is why this world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street is much more than the diagnosis of Fleet Street. It's about the diagnosis of everything that matters to most people, everything that the few do by affecting the many. And it includes, of course, the behavior and the disastrous 5 years of Jeremy Corbyn, who in the last 18 months of his 5 years was brainwashed into using this phrase, for the many, not the few. That is a catchy, very catchy slogan. So where are the supporters of the Corbyn leadership? And what are they doing for the many? We come back to Tower Hamlets and we ask the question, what are they doing, the Labour Party, doing to represent the many in Tower Hamlets? The answer is a deafening kind of nothing, really. I mean, this is just 4 weeks, maybe just about 5 weeks before the election on the 6th of May. And the question is, election or vote, let's say, whether the mayor system should exist to continue or not. The ideal answer would be no. But as we saw in the May 2010 referendum, the Labour Party were on the face of it saying that they were opposed to the mayor system. But then it later turned out that the leader of the Labour group on Travelers Council at the time, Abbasuddin alias Halal, was making false statements because he didn't actually want the no campaign to succeed. Because during that period, before the 6th of May 2010, I was told by a Labour Party member that, Brother Haque, why are you saying that the Labour Party is against the mayor system? Abbasuddin Halal is going to selected members of the Labour Party in Taram saying that they should vote for him as a candidate. That effectively cancelled any notion that Abbasuddin alias Halal was against the mayor system in 2010. But the fact that he was allowed to pose as the lead organizer of the various discussions about the mayor system showed that among the Labour Party councillors, there were other dishonest people as well, because they too wanted the mayor system, while on the outside they were saying they were against the mayor system. So now, 5 weeks before the 6th of May, several people, as we have posted on the Twitter accounts, in Tower Hamlets Labour Party are saying that they are against the mayor system. And I have to point out that it is quite possible that the lies that were perpetrated in 2010 are being perpetrated even now. If I am wrong in this observation, I will be the most delighted to be found to have been wrong, because I do want the mayor system to be scrapped and the no vote to be the majority vote at the 6th of May 2021 vote or voting. But I don't see any evidence that a lot of people are actually campaigning to scrap the mayor system. That's all I'm saying. And as I said before, if I'm wrong in this observation, because I'm only hypothetically making these comments because the event has not actually happened, but it will be too late if I spoke with evidence after the event. So hypothesis has to be the main basis. And hypothesis informed by the evidence, the substantive, and substantiated evidence as found in the behavior of the Labour Party councillors in 2010. One councillor, who is no longer a councillor but was a councillor and was a campaigner for re-election as a councillor, was a person called Rachel Saunders. Now, Rachel Saunders surfaced in Tower Hamlets as a Labour Party member, say about 20 years ago, thereabouts. And Rachel Saunders is not originally from Tower Hamlets. But because she is white, she automatically found herself established as a member of the controlling faction of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets, even though the London bureaucracy of the Labour Party has been corrupt and was corrupt and had been responsible for the state of Tower Hamlets Labour Party being kept under special measures. Now, the history of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets is full of evidence of lying and corruption and dishonesty and racism and anti-Muslim hatred and plotting and all the other things. But Rachel Saunders, during one day of canvassing, one day that I was in the Bow area where a meeting took place, allegedly to discuss the no to the mayor system. And after the meeting, outside the building where the meeting took place, for some reason I found myself standing while Rachel Saunders was standing not far from where I was standing. So I asked her if she was seriously campaigning for no. She didn't answer that one. Instead, she said she was concentrating on getting elected councillor again. Now, there should not have been that answer, because campaigning against the mayor system and campaigning for her own candidature for election as a councillor again were not in conflict. They were not two contradictory things. But the reply she gave me told more than perhaps she realized. It gave away the game. That is to say, she must have known, although she wasn't telling me, she must have known that the dedication needed by the campaign to say no to the elected mayor was absent from her Labour Party co-candidates for councillors. That is what I concluded, and that is what I have said a number of times in various posts I have made about that. Rachel Saunders is no longer a councillor because she is now working for a career somewhere outside the council. But she has posted an alleged comment saying that she is against the mayor system this time. I have seen this in the last week, but I don't believe that she is being totally against the mayor system. Because in that statement that I've seen, probably coming on the internet from a Facebook account, Rachel Saunders praises the current mayor for all kinds of supposed achievements. And she refers negatively to the previous mayor, who was Lutfur Rahman. And she pegs her comments onto the events in Liverpool, because shortly before she posted her comment, she refers to last night's events in Liverpool, which must have been in the evening before she posted the comment. And she was referring to the report published by Max Koller, who has been glorified as an inspector, appointed by the current community secretary, Robert Jenrick. Now, Rachel Saunders knew Max Koller over a period, and Max Koller and Ken Knight were the two commissioners sent to tar hamlets by Eric Pickles. Now, Max Collar and Ken Knight regularly overpraised Rachel Saunders at meetings. And the occasions that I actually observed by being sitting next to or very near Rachel Saunders and Peter Goulds, I couldn't hear, and therefore I couldn't understand what Rachel Saunders was actually saying at those meetings. But I did notice Max Collar oozing with praise for Rachel Saunders. I cannot understand what his reason was, but that was what I noticed and observed. And I confronted Max Collar and Ken Knight, while Rachel Saunders was sat next to them and next to John Biggs as well. And I openly gave a loud and noisy denunciation of the racists and liars. I called them racists and I called them liars, Ken Knight and Max Collar. And the evidence is contained in the documents because they lied. So I'm not sure that Rachel Saunders is 100% campaigning among members on the ground in the community in Tar Hamlets to support a no vote. I'm not saying she is not, but I'm not sure that she is. And when I spoke to at least one member of the Labour Party in Tar Hamlets, I was told by that member that this particular member thought that there was a need for more active campaigning for no. And they were not noticing that there was enough active campaigning for a no vote. I have seen some other people, as I said, I have mentioned them in the Khoodeelaar Twitter account. I have named them. But I still don't believe that there is an atmosphere for securing a no vote on the 6th of May, despite these people saying that they are against the mayor system. One person that I haven't mentioned in the post, or maybe I have mentioned him, I don't remember because I'm not looking at the actual posts now, but I can look later and correct any error that I'm including inadvertently in this particular statement. But overall, what they're saying is not strong enough because the campaign for yes is still going on. And the people who campaign for yes in 2010 are more or less the same individuals. And they are the people who have never apologized for the corruption, misconduct, abuse, and criminality that Lutfur Rahman, as the incumbent elected mayor, did. Remember what the executive mayor is, the elected mayor is. The elected mayor is the chief executive of the council. Full stop. The elected mayor says something and nobody has got a veto against the elected mayor. That's what Lutfur Rahman did for the years When he got in October 2010, so that was calendar year 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it was 6 calendar years that Luthuroman was in post as the elected mayor. Remember, elected mayor within quotation marks, because I don't believe in elected mayor, and I don't believe that Luthuroman, in my view, had the qualifications or the character to get elected at all. And I have outlined and I have detailed and I have named and mentioned several incidents and several individuals, so I don't have to repeat those. And as I say, anyone who thinks that my references to and descriptions in the context of this discussion of the behavior of, within quotation mark, Maulana Shamsul Haq, associated mostly with the Ford Square Mosque in Whitechapel, and the so-called Baroness Pola Munzila Uddin, both of whom appeared to give evidence supporting the contention that Lutfur Rahman was a person of good character during the hearing before Richard Morey. And both on the published evidence were exposed as liars in their own wrongs. And they fundamentally confirmed the general narrative that Lutfur Rahman was surrounded by liars and was backed by liars. Now those people, or that type of people, are again spreading the lies and saying to the voters in Tower Hamlets that the corrupt mayor system is a good thing. They are saying that the corrupt mayor system in Tower Hamlets is a system that belongs to the people. Janata, Janagon, they say. That is an absolute, ignorant, dishonest lie. Because, as I said, I have been doing politics and political campaigning and rights advocacy, international, regional, national advocacy, ethical campaigning, since before Lutfur Rahman was biologically born. This is not a comparison, but this is just the emphasis on the shallowness of the lies that they're telling. And when Lutfur Rahman was a councillor, he was only councillor directly as a result of the Labour Party's internal corruption. Because somebody corruptly thought that a gullible individual like Lutfur Rahman would serve that somebody's agenda for getting into a leadership position in the Labour Party. That somebody was, of course, Abbasuddin alias Halal. And Abbasuddin alias Halal would ideally want the Labour Party councillors to be as stupid and as ignorant as possible. Because in that case, that's the scenario Abbasuddin alias Halal worked in for the number of years that he became, quote, leader of the Labour group on Townless Council. He says 4 times. That means that a kind of in Siloti, there is a phrase, Auror Mazahi al Raza. I mean, if you've got a field that has got people of limited abilities, then the person who has got some abilities is more likely to get the top position. So Abbasuddin alias Halal operated on that fallacy for too long. So therefore, I'm not sure that the people, including Abbasuddin alias, who are allegedly saying that they want the mayor system to end, I don't think that they are doing enough work to stop the other side misleading too many people for the vote. I'm not saying that will happen, but it is a kind of psephological possibility. I'm not saying it's a certainty, but it's a psephological possibility. Psephology is the study of electoral behavior. And psephology is not quite properly listed in the dictionaries yet. But in the vocabulary of broadcasters, psephology is quite often used. Now, the people who have come or gone on the record as saying that they're opposed to the mayor system have not listed any real arguments against the mayor system. That doesn't mean that the mayor system has no defects. I'm saying that the defects have to be listed. And these people that I have seen and mentioned haven't said the defects enough times or enough of the defects. And for an effective campaign to secure a vote, no vote, all the defects of the mayor system must be clearly, consistently listed. I'll discuss more about the yes campaigners a bit later. Back to the commentary about the backlist school. One of the things that happens when Muslims, like the Batley protesters, kind of stage a protest about schools, almost always about schools. One of the things that happens in reaction to Muslims making a protest about schools, curriculum, etc., is that no matter where it is, and most of these protests have been happening in the last decade or so in the northern English countries, in the England counties. The London-based broadcasting outlets immediately start to operate a program of dismissing and distorting what is happening by way of the main kind of demands by the protesters. And this is happening now with Batley. The woman called Julia, we call her Julia Heartless, and the last part of the double-barreled name we don't pronounce, because our version of her last name amounts to an obscene word. An obscenity is based entirely on her behavior. So we don't want to say that word on the record here, just for decency reason. But Julia Heartless is one of those white, racist, self-serving women that the mainstream media gives overly big platform to. Now, Julia Heartless is on the record as having praised her. It's her public statements. Praised her sexual attractiveness. Because although she says that she didn't suffer any harm when a man put their hand on her thigh or her leg or whatever. She says that, but she also says that while she is exploiting the Ferrari created by somebody else, accusing another person of sexually harassing them. Think about the complexity and subtleness of this operator, Julia Heartless, whatever. Now, Julia Heartless is the second one after Katie Hopkins. Well, Alison Pierce is another one. But Julia Heartless, Alison Pierce, Carol Moron, and a few others are on the list of, let's say, 10 anti-Muslim, racist white women. And Julia Heartless has been having a very enjoyable 24 hours so far at the expense of the Batley School Muslim protesters. Now, I have to say again very clearly, this program is not a chat show. It's not a talk show. It is unique in the sense that we are going into depth and details, chapter and verse. And again, I say the offer is available, open to anyone who thinks that any fact or factual reference that I've made or I'm making is open to challenge substantially. They can send a direct message by following the Twitter account, but otherwise, we don't entertain any kind of communication for the sake of it or for the aggro. And what happened with Julia Hartley, whatever, is that she's one of those people who muscles her way into the platform. I mean, the first effective muscle woman to exploit her being a woman was, of course, Janet Street Porter. But Janet Street Porter is now more than 70 years old, and a relatively younger one like Julia Heartless is given the space more readily than Janet Street Porter gets. So all these women who hate Muslims and who are white get away with their anti-Muslim incitement. Because no Muslim woman with the grounded knowledge, and ethical, evidential authority exists to challenge any of them. Now, there is a dubious name, not the person, I'm saying the name, which comes across like a Hindu name. And apparently, the person whose name it is claims to be a Muslim. But then she has posted in the past, boasts that she said that she likes to have vigorous sex. No self-respecting Muslim man or woman would ever do that while at the same time saying they're Muslim. That is simply not done. So that adds to the question as to whether this person is a genuine believer in Islam or she is just a part of a strategy for somebody else to use that kind of tag, not this person, but tag the fact or claim that this is a Muslim, making all kinds of anti-Muslim statements. She doesn't actually match the requirements to answer on behalf of the Muslim womanhood, the lies and anti-Muslim hatred and incitement spewed by Julia Heartless, and the recently kind of installed first Muslim woman Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain is no match either. There are some other Muslim women in certain posts in kind of public sector, let's say, or in the charities. But they all fail intellectually, evidentially, ethically, and morally, and in terms of the depth of knowledge in the field concerned. So what we are doing is pointing out these things. We are not saying that these women should not be in posts that they occupy. We are saying that there is not one that meets the requirements. And Julia Heartless, I think she thinks that she's a member of the royal family. Well, she's not alone, because there are several other white women kind of journalists who actually think that they're as important as the royal family. So what we have, therefore, is that these anti-Muslim hate spewers are getting away with lies and hatred without being challenged by people that, let's say, meet the gender requirements. It would be very effective if a number of Muslim women existed that actually challenged and took on these kind of anti-Muslim spewers like Julia Heartless, Alison Pierce, Julie Beachell, and of course Katie Hopkins, or others in the BBC or in the Lose Women broadcast. I mean, Lose Women still have a kind of relationship with Janet Street Porter, but she's not one of the currently mainly hyped members of the Lose Women slot on ITV. There are degenerate women, degenerate as racists, degenerate as fascists, degenerate as opponents of democracy, and degenerate as selfish, uncaring, cruelty peddling, lacking in compassion, self-servers in posts either as MPs or as ministers in the Johnson cabal's cabinet. Now, there is no Muslim kind of counter from a Muslim by Muslim women of intellectual ability and knowledge and ethical integrity. So we come back to Saida Warsi. Now, Saida Warsi is a member of the House of Peers. And Saida Warsi was put in there by Cameron. That was a device because Saida Warsi couldn't get elected as MP, so therefore she was given an alternative route to Parliament. But Warsi has made a career as a kind of mentioned as a conservative and a conservative Muslim peer. But that's it. Warsi doesn't really have a record of speaking with the intellectual rigor and standard that is required on anything. And she pops up, whenever she does pop up, as a conservative Muslim peer, only when she can make a public statement declaring, announcing her presence and availability, and then she has a meandering trip around acceptable copies of what other conservative racists have said. So she uses racist words, anti-Muslim words and phrases, and she doesn't add to the substance of the debate, let alone create a movement away from the status quo of anti-Muslim hostility and racist hostility and anti-Windrush generation hostility. So we find this country in public debate and discourse and public platforms as descending into fascism every time. And no organized opposition is being offered to the fascist descent. When I say that, I have to add also that despite their availability as hijackers of certain campaigns, the socialist workers are very, very, very absent from the arena of debating and opposing, evidentially opposing, fascism. Now, the socialist workers don't claim Owen Jones as one of their members. But Owen Jones, who is a hypocrite, he comes from the Merseyside area, I think, but he's a mainstream media kind of practitioner because of his membership of the corrupt club, Oxbridge. He has got the label of having gone to an Oxford college. We shall discuss the corruption of Oxbridge as a special series of discussion, diagnosis, evidential. Because my thesis is that there is no such thing as Oxbridge or its equivalent from France or the USA or Canada or Australia or New Zealand. If we are talking, when talking about Oxbridge, if we are talking about substance. So the real purpose of Oxbridge and its equivalent anywhere else, including Harvard, the real purpose, Harvard, MIT, whatever, the real purpose is a network of crooks and criminals that are placed in strategic jobs and kind of careers by other criminals who have preceded them, gone before them. Because in the courses, the actual courses, the academic courses at Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or MIT or Yale, whatever, the actual contents are not kind of closed to others. So any scholar, any learner, any investigator is open to seek and obtain what the Oxford and Cambridge ones do, and more than most of the Oxbridge ones can and do get hold of. And in my case, it's of course It applies to any Oxbridge or whatever, because I've dealt with so-called Oxbridge dons and Oxbridge whatever, the students and alumni, whatever. Now, as I said before, one criminal at Cambridge who got a PhD, and he got that by using significant help from my family in London and in Bangladesh. And I shall discuss that criminal in due course, and I shall discuss the criminal solely as an exhibit to further the argument that having a PhD is no proof that somebody has achieved anything. The substance has to be there. In fact, so many PhDs are dished out by so many British universities of the so-called Russell Group that are absolutely pieces of criminality. Lies, fraud, deception, theft, plagiarism, and worse. So I shall discuss this criminal who is actually a resident in the London borough of Waltham Forest. He lives in the Leighton area. And I actually taught him over a period of 2 years. And this criminal has written a so-called PhD thesis, he says, about community groups in Tower Hamlets, Bangladeshi community groups in Tower Hamlets. Now, those who have been watching this program will know that we are conducting investigation into the events of the subcontinent starting in August 1947 up to now. As part of that, we are investigating the role of the Indian cinema, and we shall be looking at the role of the Pakistani cinema, the Bangladesh cinema, as part of the examination of the evidence from August 1947 to now. And all the things that are used as symbols or representative symbols, evidential, factually representative symbols of what the promise was for the kind of so-called movement for independence from the British and what the reality has been. That is not the only aspect, but that's the key aspect of it. And looking at the whole subcontinent by using my involvement in the actual aims of freedom and liberation and human rights, I think we are doing another original investigation that will expose and have sharply kind of focused implications and lessons about the taking for granted of the slogans about independence by the systematic crooks who have taken positions in business, in government, and in parliaments and so on, and are doing more damage to the human rights and basic rights, civil liberties of the people in these countries than is ever being recognized, either in the media or in parliament or in politics or in any other part. I mean, two incidents that happened to the Nehru family. Of course, the deaths of Indira Gandhi and her son Rajiv Gandhi. Those two only highlight the failures of the Nehru dynasty to understand the purpose of independence, the purpose of independent India. Now, Nehru wasn't kind of murdered like Indira Gandhi or Rajiv Gandhi, but Nehru did a serious series of disservice to the country. He lied about Kashmir and he lied about other parts, and he actually founded or laid the foundation of the very expensive, tense relationship between India and Pakistan. The independence for both Pakistan and India in 1947 was not supposed to be creating the kind of tension and hostility that it did create. So what I'm doing is looking at the evidence of why this happened and why is the Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi so-called media completely silent. I have looked at too many Indian films in the lockdown, let's say, and the films are flimsy, shallow, and very artificial, and hardly any mention of the actual promise for independence, the promise that were promises made for the people of India in the run-up to the 1947, August 1947, end of the so-called empire. So how long have we been online, live on this broadcast? Let's check, a general check. So it is like 22:45, so 23:45. And what is the time now? It's just coming up to 10 minutes after 2. So 02 10 hours GMT. So we shall kind of call this one, we shall call to a halt this one, and we shall continue discussing the rest of it in the next editions.